In any negotiation, the key is to understanding what the other person wants. In the case of Connor McDavid, what does the Oilers captain and the best player in the NHL today want?
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to this Thursday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. This upcoming October will be my fourth NHL season as a host on the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been doing digital hockey content for more than 10 years now, and I am so grateful to everyone that is making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network where we've got your team covered every day. And today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Football is right around the corner. Visit the FanDuel app today. Start planning your futures bets now. Today's edition of Locked On Oilers, we're going to be talking about the Connor McDavid contract negotiations. We have an update of sorts from Ryan Rishaug, who has had tidbits here and there about this process. We'll start there, the big picture, where everything seems to be, whether or not we believe this report. We'll try and read the tea leaves. In our second segment, we're going to try and put ourselves in Connor McDavid's shoes and interpret what matters to him. Then in our final segment, we'll put ourselves in the shoes of the Oilers, what they can do to get this deal over the finish line, and let's get to work. So, whenever you're dealing with the negotiation, you got to understand leverage. You got to understand what people want, what they have, what they don't have, and what they're trying to get. And when we're talking about contract negotiation, it's very simple. One side has money, the other side has something. Now, if you deal in business to business, sometimes you're selling goods as opposed to services. But for the purposes of this conversation, we will say Connor McDavid would like to sell his services to the Edmonton Oilers. The market rate for best player in the world goes up every single time a superstar player signs a contract extension. Now, we are operating in a very weird economic landscape within the NHL. So to start out, the NHL salary cap is a relatively new phenomena in the context of greater NHL history. The salary cap, a byproduct of that 2004 lockout that wiped out an entire season. When the NHL came back the following year, there was a salary cap in place for the first time in the league's history, and that has had a real depressing effect on the wages of players over the course of the last 20 years. And the NHL has struggled at times to keep up with the growth rate of the other major professional sports leagues. And some of that is just by the nature of hockey, who it appeals to, where it is geographically, having 7 teams in another country with a different currency, the currency exchange of Canadian to American dollars being disfavorable to Canada. There are a litany of factors within the economics of the league that got them to this point. But I would, of course, point to the way revenue is earned in the NHL, where the money largely comes from in the NHL, by far the biggest dependent league on revenue from gates, meaning ticket sales, game day stuff. People coming to the building, getting in a seat, and watching the game. The NHL is the most dependent on that. And you'll recall, NHL stadiums are a lot smaller than baseball and football stadiums. They're smaller. In the United States, not as much than soccer stadiums. It depends on the team. Some only 10 to 15, some as much as 30 to 40. So I think that's the first real point to get here. And because effectively this crop of stars, McDavid, Austin Matthews, Nathan McKinnon, Draisaitl, that cohort of guys who came into the league in the mid to late 2010s, they have all dealt with this in varying ways. And there used to be a prevailing sentiment amongst the league stars that as soon as you became eligible for that big extension, the 8 by whatever the going rate was, you signed it. Guys did not, and frankly do not, get to unrestricted free agency in the NHL because there's always been a little bit of an undercurrent of labor uncertainty. There has been an implicit understanding that, as peaceful as things might seem, and it does seem like the NHL and PA have gotten better with this. They got their CBA, the next one, done well ahead of schedule, got the Olympics squared away, a couple things. They took a year off the max extension teams could offer. All of those things to say guys were really inclined to take that financial security up front, especially Stars trying to get that signing bonus skewed cap payout. So that way you would get the one lump sum on July 1st and then your base salary get paid out over the course of the year. There was a real impetus, and it was really important, frankly, when the salary cap was a lot lower. And frankly, I don't think we're keeping it in perspective where the salary cap used to be. I mean, we're only about 10 years removed from the salary cap being in the ballpark of $40 million. And look, year over year, $4 or $5 million increases, they do add up over time. And frankly, that's about where they are. But if the NHL had kept up with the rate of salary cap increase that it had, we'd be well over $100 million by now. But because of the economics of the pandemic, which inhibited teams' abilities to have fans in the building, there was a massive disparity in revenue, and that forced teams to effectively play for less money. And the owners weren't going to take less money out of the overall split. So the players had to pay back the owners. It took the better part of 2 seasons, but now everything is squared away. We are operating with an increasing salary cap, and that means Connor McDavid has the right and has earned the right to set his price at the top of the line. Right now, I would be shocked if Connor McDavid took anything less than $17 to $18 million per year. I know that sounds like a lot, but you have to remember, we are talking about the best player in the world, who has largely been underpaid and probably will be underpaid his entire career because of the economics of the NHL. But that puts you in a position as the Oilers, where they are now, where you effectively are waiting for him to tell you the price. And that's where we get to the Ryan Rishaug report from earlier today, where he said, quote, "There has not been a back and forth on years and money yet." So what I would assume is that right before Connor went away for the summer, he gave his agent a number and term, and that was it. You know, there's the one scene in in The Sopranos, where Frank Vincent's character says, "It's not a negotiation. This is my position." And frankly, that's how the Oilers need to interpret this. I don't expect there to be a lot of back and forth. Could the Oilers perhaps be asking, hey, could you go another year? Could you go 2 more years? Because if you're the Oilers, and we'll talk about the Oilers' perspective in our final segment, so I won't jump ahead too much, but if you're the Oilers, you want to get McDavid as locked up as you can now, so that way, as the salary cap increases over the next handful of seasons, you are going to have him at an affordable price. And look, $17, $18 million a year for a single player sounds insane, I know, especially in the context of what us normal people make in our day jobs. But at the same time, this is the best NHL player in the world. He instantly elevates anybody around him and the team he is on. And the Oilers have a lot to consider as far as the direction of their roster, where they want to prioritize assets, where they want to spend money. But make no mistake, and we talked about this pretty extensively on yesterday's show, if you are a team that is trying to win the Stanley Cup right now, you cannot trade the best player in the sport. Those two ideas are incongruous with each other, and they do not work. So we are going to take our first break of today's show. When we come back, I'm going to put myself in Connor McDavid's shoes and try and walk through what I would be considering for this contract extension coming up next. The NFL season is almost here, and FanDuel's making sure you're ready to kick off the season with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new FanDuel customers can bet just $5, and if that bet hits, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use on the app. I love using FanDuel because it makes it so easy to get in on the fun. Whether you're doing it before kickoff, during the game with live betting, or you're piecing together a same-game parlay with your friends, it makes the action all the more exciting. It's quick, easy, and fast to pay out. So, are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. One more time, download the FanDuel app or visit FanDuel.com, place that first $5 bet, and if your bet wins, you'll take home $300 to bet on the FanDuel app. We here at Locked On have an important request. We want to hear from you. We've put together a survey to learn more about our listeners and make your favorite podcasts even better. This is your chance to tell us what you like, what you don't like, and answer questions about our advertising. Go to lockedonpodcast.com/survey to get started. Everyone who completes a survey will be entered for a chance to win one of 10 $100 Amazon gift cards. Again, that's lockedonpodcast.com/survey. You can also find the link in the show notes. Thanks for helping us out. And no, I cannot enter as a Locked On contributor, so I will not be filling out that survey, but be sure to do us here a solid, get us some actionable information so we can make your listening and watching experience all the better. So continuing it on in our exercise, I'm going to put myself in Connor McDavid's shoes. And I would start by saying I doubt Connor McDavid would be wearing a Pekka Rinne hat, but I know Connor McDavid respects the game, respects the history, and would understand why I own a Pekka Rinne hat. I was very moved. I miss Pekka Rinne. I miss the goalies of my childhood, Bobby Lou, Hank, Pekka Rinne, Ben Bishop. I feel old a lot of the times, and you got to remember, guys, you got to have those little moments. And to start out this conversation about the McDavid perspective, it comes down to two very different principles. So, number one, do you want to win or do you want to take as much money as you possibly can? Those two represent a binary choice. And look, this is going to be an uncomfortable exercise for some people out there. For someone who is a normal person who makes $50,000, $60,000 a year, the premise of somebody saying no, $8-9 million is not enough is insulting. You know, you do backbreaking blue collar labor. You're a plumber, you're an electrician, you're a mason. You are working with your hands. You have back pain, knee pain. The thought of somebody saying $8 million per year and you're only working, 8-9 months a year, that's a little insulting. But within the context of professional sports where we are operating, where our conversation is based, you need to understand that you have a certain responsibility. And I've talked about this a lot. I talked about this with Leon, with Evan Bouchard, with those extensions as they came down. When you are the next guy up, when you are the next star to get paid, regardless of your position, you have an obligation to the guys who will come down the line to try and get as much money as you possibly can. I know that sounds a bit jarring. I know that sounds a bit gross in certain circles, but if you're Connor McDavid and you take less than even Nathan McKinnon's getting from Colorado, you are not advancing the goalpost, and you have an obligation to the players in your union, to the guys who are going to come down the line in the future, to get as much money as you possibly can so that when their turn to negotiate comes, they have that negotiating power to operate from. It's not a coincidence that Leon got the extension he did after what McKinnon got, and McDavid will get this one after what Draisaitl gets. Austin Matthews is in the not so distant future. That's one to keep an eye on. For the defenseman position, Quinn Hughes is somebody who's 2 years away from unrestricted free agency, who will likely reset the price point at that position as well. Makar, somebody who will reset the price point. But you have an obligation. Igor Shesterkin did this for the goalies. Bob had set that price point at $10 million, became the first goalie with a cap hit of over $10 million to win the Stanley Cup, did it 2 times in a row for good measure. And that's where we're at as far as the earnings. The other question, and this is something that I do think we have to wrap our heads around now, especially in the context of what we talked about in that first segment, that there was a real impetus that as soon as you were eligible to sign that max term, that 7-year extension, you did it. Now that the finances seem to be a little bit more stable, the labor situation seems to be a little bit more stable, it would not shock me to see guys go the Austin Matthews route. Do a 4-year deal. Don't do 7. Don't do 8. When you sign a 4 or 5-year deal, you are saying, I'm going to get to free agency again, or at least have the threat of going to free agency again while I am still close to my prime. And that's really the trick to understanding where we're at now. I think if McDavid were, and I frankly, if I were his agent, if I were advising him, or in this case, if I were him, I would be looking at a 3-year deal. I would be looking at a 4-year deal, absolute max. I know that if I get to free agency again in 3 years at 31 years old, I am going to be able to draw pretty much whatever number I want on that check, and I can do 1 year. I can do 2 years. Or if I really want to maximize my earnings and get as much money as I possibly can, I'm doing a 3-year deal to 31. I'm doing a 2-year deal to 33. And I am going to keep building cap increases into my long-term financial planning, because 2 or 3 years from now, the NHL salary cap will probably be north of $120 million. So if McDavid signs for, let's say, $16 million right now for 3 years, and then 3 years from now, the salary cap ceiling is $125 million, well, the price of McDavid went a lot up. The price of McDavid went from 15 or 16 million. I think he'll probably be around 16 to probably 20, maybe even close to 25. If the salary cap is upwards of 125, maybe even as much as 130 million. That's what it comes down to for a player. And look, a lot of people have gotten on guys on the Leafs, whether it's Matthews, whether it's Marner, for taking as much money as they could get and not really being as concerned with the team around them. I think when you have seen guys like what the Devils have put together, where Jack Hughes, Nico Hischier, Jesper Bratt have all taken lower than they could have, lower than the maximum amount they could have earned. So the team had more money to spend. You know, the Bruins did this forever, where nobody made more money than Bergeron, and that set the standard that that's the best player on this team. Nobody makes more than the best player on this team. We are all bought in, and the Bruins were able to assemble some truly great rosters around their guys because their marquee players were willing to take less money. I think we are going to see a slight cultural shift. I won't say it's going to happen overnight, but you look at the situation down in Florida, Barkov, Matthew Tkachuk, Gus Forsling, all taking below what I would consider market value for their skill sets. And that has put them in a position where they can overpay a little bit for guys down the lineup like a Seth Jones or a Brad Marchand. And that's really your trick, you know. Can you get quality depth around your stars? And that, at least for me, is where I have pause if I'm Connor McDavid about this team remaining a Stanley Cup contender. Me, Nick Zararis, host of Locked On Oilers, has been pretty consistent this summer that this group has a lot of question marks, more question marks than teams that go on to win the Stanley Cup typically have entering the season. Of course, there are outliers. You could be the 2018 Capitals. You could be the 2019 Blues. But if you're going for 2 out of 10, you know, you're going for 20% probability. That's not great if that's what you're banking on. And that's like your best case scenario is only 20% of the time. That's a real challenge. And the Oilers have the opportunity here to put McDavid in a position where it's going to be on him. And we're going to get there in a second. And I do think, and real quick, I didn't say this in the first segment and I meant to, but I forgot because we kind of got carried away in the conversation. The report that McDavid and the Oilers have not gone back and forth on negotiations is out there from McDavid's people. McDavid and his agent know that as soon as they put the impetus on the Oilers to be the ones to get the ball rolling, they get the court of public opinion going. And then everybody who's been antsy about this summer, whether it's about McDavid, whether it's about the quality of the roster, the goaltending, the lack of depth, whatever you've been antsy about for the offseason, the second we start saying, well, training camp's 2 weeks away and he's still not signed. Training camp's a week away, he's still not signed. Then the pressure goes entirely to the Oilers because there is an implicit understanding. The best player in the world asks for the number he wants, and the team gives it to him. Now, that might not be the best way to run a hockey team, but culturally, and frankly, what fans expect, yeah, that is what the expectation is. So we're going to take our second and final break on today's show. When we come back, we're going to put ourselves in Stan Bowman's shoes and try and figure out what we can do to convince Connor McDavid to sign here for more than just 3 years. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what's in them, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And if you don't have the full picture, you can leave money on the table. That's where our friends at Monarch Money come in. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you've put off organizing your finances, Monarch is here for you. Monarch does all the heavy lifting. You can link all of your accounts in minutes, see clear data visualizations, get smart categorizations of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. Monarch has made me aware that I'm not really saving as much money as I probably should, both for my emergency fund and for my retirement. And with Monarch, it has put me on course for where I need to be. Do not let financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year subscription. One more time, that is 50% off your first year subscription at monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONNHL. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Thursday edition of Locked On Oilers as we read through the tea leaves. And if you're not an everydayer, if you're newer to the show, I talk about reading the news a lot. I have a journalism background. I went to journalism school. I think a lot about how source cultivation works. I think a lot about how pressure works and why information gets reported. So the question you have to ask yourself is, who benefits from this reporting? And right now, if you're from the outside looking in like we are, you understand, hey, McDavid doesn't have an extension yet. McDavid is expressing that he's not really interested in a back and forth. He and his agent told the Oilers their position. They told the Oilers what their expectations were. And there hasn't been a back and forth. So if it's out there that the Oilers know what McDavid wants and he doesn't have it yet, well, that puts the Oilers, their management, their stakeholders, under the microscope. What is the holdup? Do the Oilers need to make a financial move? Do they need to cut salary somewhere else? Well, no. McDavid's extension would kick in next year. So as far as we're concerned, could they shave $300,000 off by getting rid of Janmark and putting somebody who's in on $1 million in that spot? Yeah, they could do that. But that's not the holdup here. If I am the Oilers, I am being very straight up. And I said this on yesterday's show, but I don't think you can sell the McDavid or the fan base on this. We're probably taking a step back this upcoming season. Look, Connor, we have a team that's gone to the Stanley Cup final 2 years in a row. We have had a brain drain of our wingers over the last 2 years. We have uncertainty in net. We are going to do everything in our power to upgrade our goaltending. We think we're going to play better team defense because we're going to have a full season of Jake Wallman. We think we have the capacity to play good special teams, be good enough 5-on-5, and play good defense, and that will get us in the postseason. Once we get to the playoffs, we have you, we have Leon, we have Zach Hyman, we have Evan Bouchard, we have Matthias Ekholm. That is one of the best 1-5s in do-or-die situations in the entire NHL. As long as you are here, we will have a chance at winning the Stanley Cup. We need you if we are going to win a Stanley Cup. You stay here in Edmonton, you will have a chance to run down Wayne Gretzky's records. You will have a chance to run down Wayne Gretzky's Oilers record. You can retire as the greatest player in the history of a team that has employed Wayne Gretzky. Now, that is a steep undertaking, and I don't think McDavid takes that lightly in the slightest. I have been very adamant that for guys like that, for the best in the world, you reach a certain point where the individual accomplishments and accolades, they're nice, but that's just fuel. You know, I've quoted it a lot, and if you're an everydayer, I apologize for referencing Timothée Chalamet's Golden Globe speech again, but he said, I want to be one of the greats. I look at Viola Davis, I look at Marlon Brando, I look at Michael Phelps, I look at Michael Jordan. I want to be in those conversations. And winning a Golden Globe, it's nice. It's motivation. It keeps you going. But to get to the top of the mountain, you need to have that sustained drive. And I have no reservations or questions about Connor's commitment to staying the best player in the world as long as he possibly can. But we also have to be realistic here. This is a team sport. Even though the Oilers had 3 of the 5 best players in the world on their team last year, the depth or lack thereof was their undoing in the Stanley Cup final. The fact we are going on a second straight year with Calvin Pickard and Stuart Skinner as the goaltending tandem is a real question mark. And there isn't a lot of baked in stability in this group. There are a lot of guys, and we've spent so much of this summer talking about Zach Hyman and Ryan Nugent-Hopkins and Adam Henrique. Can they bounce back? For guys like Ike Howard, Vasily Podkolzin, and Matthew Savoie, can they break out? And just going off of basic probability, not everything the Oilers need to go right is going to go right. But at the same time, I am going to remain pretty optimistic here. I am going to say the Oilers are going to get this taken care of. They are going to end up hurting themselves down the line because they're going to end up needing to shed more salary next summer, and they're going to deplete their roster. And look, yes, the salary cap is going up. No, you cannot trade Connor McDavid and say you are a Stanley Cup contender. Those two things do not work. I do think the Oilers will get this done. I do think Connor and his agent have been very strategic in keeping a low profile this summer. Remember, Connor was on a double honeymoon with Leon, his wife, and Connor's wife. So there was a real layoff. You know, if you're away like that on a trip like that, you're not really as tapped in with work. And if you want to take, you know, the optimistic read or maybe the honest read, yeah, he and his agent haven't gone back and forth with the Oilers because they made a position and Connor said, I'm going on vacation for 3 weeks. We'll deal with this later. And look, I know he's in Calgary for Team Canada orientation. We know Team Canada, Hockey Canada, the Olympics are going to loom over this season, but the Oilers will not enter the regular season without this resolved. I would dare to say it's career suicide for Stan Bowman should the Oilers enter the regular season without Connor McDavid under extension for next year, at least. And look, I was pretty adamant in that second segment that if I'm Connor, I'm signing for 3 or 4 years at the most. I want a chance to reset the market again 3 or 4 years from now when the salary cap is bigger, get a bigger chunk of the cap, and 2 or 3 years from now, we might have a better team around me because I understand. When you win in the regular season consistently, you're going to pay the price eventually. And the Oilers have lost an awful lot of talent. They had a lot of guys on good contracts who were cheap, like Ryan McLeod, like Warren Fogle, like Corey Perry, like Connor Brown. You lose Dylan Holloway. You lose Philip Broberg. The keys to remaining sustained contender are turning over younger players and saving money wherever you can. And the Oilers are banking on their young guys hitting. They are banking on Savoie and Howard coming in here and being good right away. But that will just about do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. If you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please give the show a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, hit that alarm bell, get a notification whenever new content goes live. Be sure to check out that Locked On survey. Get a chance at $100 in an Amazon gift card. Be sure to check out Locked On NHL and Locked On NHL Game Night, where they are previewing all 32 teams ahead of the 2025-2026 season. I will see you guys tomorrow. Until then, let's go Oilers.